Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be back here. I've missed the symposium the last couple of years due to family commitments, and it's always so uplifting and wonderful to be here. We're going to change gears a little bit from Crab-A and celebrating the fact that Crab-A is now on the rusp, something that, is unbelievably fantastic. I'm really happy to say that I live in a state that has been doing Crab-A newborn screening for about 7 years now. I worked with Terry Hammond, who's here somewhere, and several other families in getting legislation passed in Illinois way back in 2007 to add Crab-A and a number of other lysosomal disorders to our state screening panel. It took our state a very long time to get it together, to get it going, but finally they did, and now it's so gratifying for me to see that families have the opportunity to choose treatment for their children with Crab-A disease. And I want the same thing for other treatable disorders that we can identify at birth, and one of those is metachromatic leukodystrophy. So I'm going to just talk briefly today about metachromatic leukodystrophy. Why do we want screening for MLD? We want screening for the same reason, we want it for Crab-A. MLD is now a very treatable disease. Throughout my career, I've seen the devastation of families diagnosed with a child with MLD, progressive, degenerative neurologic course, death in childhood, really only supportive care available, no disease-modifying treatment. But that has changed. And so we now have really what I see as the most miraculous treatment option I've seen develop for a genetic disease in my 47-year career. And that is gene therapy for metachromatic leukodystrophy. There are kids with late infantile MLD who without treatment would invariably be paralyzed by 4 to 5 years of age, can't walk, can't talk, can't move, who are going to school, playing with their friends, playing baseball, growing up to be teenagers, and indistinguishable from other kids. And to me, that's a miracle. So we have treatment, but like with Crab-A, for most patients diagnosed after the onset of symptoms, it is not effective. It is not available. So we must have newborn screening. So the treatment that we have is called Lenmeldy. It's gene therapy. It's ex vivo gene therapy. The patient's own stem cells are used, and then the genes are introduced, and then they're given back to the patient. It's lentiviral-mediated gene therapy. It's just approved this year by the FDA. It has been approved a little bit longer in Europe. Europe was ahead of us. It's indicated for patients with pre-symptomatic late infantile or early juvenile MLD or early symptomatic early juvenile MLD. It's not indicated for symptomatic patients with late infantile MLD. It just accelerates the disease. It isn't helpful. Or for late juvenile or adult MLD. There are no data in those patient groups. So as I mentioned, the way it works is the patient's own stem cells are harvested, copies of the ARSA gene are put in, and one thing that they do achieve, which is I think a very important part of this, is that the genes are overexpressed, so they make lots of the deficient enzyme, the aryl sulfatase, and then they're reintroduced into the patient, and then as in transplant for Crab-A, there are macrophage cells that travel into the CNS, become microglia, and donate enzyme to other cell types in the CNS. Because this involves the transplant process, treatment can only be done at certified treatment centers. It can't be done by any local physician taking care of a patient with MLD. Right now, there's only one certified treatment center in the U.S., that's at Minnesota. But there are 4 others that have been identified and are getting set up to be ready to give the treatment. Other treatments for MLD, of course, we have hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, which can modify the course of the disease in some later, more slowly progressive patients. There was a Takeda, some of you may know, intrathecal enzyme replacement trial ongoing. It's actually still ongoing. We're a site at our center for giving back the ARSA enzyme to patients through a port into the cerebrospinal fluid around the spine and then into the brain. That clinical trial has completed, and the data show that even though very good biochemical correction of the disorder was achieved in the brain, there was no benefit observed in terms of halting the progression of the loss of motor skills in patients who were enrolled very early when they were still ambulatory, so very early stage of the disease. It did not slow that decline compared to a natural history study. However, there were some investigators and families in the trial who felt like there may have been benefits in things that weren't designed to be measured in the trial, so cognitive and so on. So the trial is still ongoing. Only in those patients who are already enrolled. There's no new patients being enrolled, and the future of it is just a little unclear. At one time, the plan of the company was to halt it because no benefit was shown, but now the patients are continuing to receive treatment if they choose to do so, and it's just not clear what the future of that is going to be. So we have a really excellent treatment. It only works if the patient's pre-symptomatic with late infantile, the most common form of MLD. We have to have newborn screening. So what's the status of it? Well, there's an ongoing program in Germany that has demonstrated that screening works. Dr. Gelb developed the assays, and at the end, he's going to tell you a little bit, for those of you who like to know the technical details, about what we're measuring with newborn screening. But the German group has shown that it's worked. They've detected a number of cases, kids who've then been able to go on and get the gene therapy. Several states in the U.S. are proceeding to consider or to set up newborn screening for MLD. I'm very happy to say that I think Illinois is going to be the first, because this past year, 2023, I worked with a family there. We got legislation passed in the state of Illinois because we knew therapy was coming. It wasn't there yet, but we knew it was coming, to get MLD added to our newborn screening panel. We don't know exactly when they're going to start. They have said as early as this fall. Dr. Gelb is skeptical that that probably won't occur, but they will start at some point. And there are a number of other states now considering it. And an application has been submitted to the RUSP to add MLD to the RUSP. I think it's a very strong application, as you know. We have two other leukodystrophies on it currently, XALD and Krabbe. And at the August meeting of the Secretary's Advisory Committee, a decision will be made on whether it will be sent forward for full evidence review. As you heard from Dr. Matern's talk, that takes 9 to 12 months before then the committee would actually vote on whether to recommend it be added to the RUSP. But we're very hopeful. I think it's as strong a case as you could possibly make. The only thing we don't have is a lot of pilot data from the U.S., but we definitely have the German data, which are excellent, and we have some anonymized data from the U.S. So what do we do in the meantime? I mean, I am a firm believer that we need to get this going as soon as we can, everywhere we can, using whatever method works, right? Now, there has been a group pulled together. Lisa Brackbill, who's a Krabbe parent, actually, she emailed me and said, oh, please mention that I have a strategic plan that's been endorsed by Cure MLD and by also the MLD Foundation. They're working this year with 6 states that have well-established programs for considering and adding new disorders that have functional advisory committees. They're not really endorsing going the legislative route. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, because I feel like We have to do whatever works. And look what Hunter's Hope achieved before the disorder got on the RUSP with getting this going in 10 to 12 states. So you have to look at what goes on in your state and what works in your state. And let's get it going. I mean, we don't have a guarantee it's going to be immediately added to the RUSP. I'm hopeful it will be, but it's going to take a year. Let's get these states going to try to get the process in place because it takes time. It takes time for states to set it up. So if you're interested in this, I'd say find out what your state, what the system is in your state. Do they have a newborn screening advisory committee that considers new disorders? How do you get before that committee? Find out from their newborn screening program, just what is the process? Has legislation been used to add the several more recent disorders? If so, then that's the way to go. You don't have to use your own legislator. You know, look around, and if your representative or your senator from your area is not that receptive, or maybe they're junior, they're not that powerful, look at who in your state has been interested in health-related issues and who has clout. Who is, that's what we did in Illinois. We drove down to Moline. I live in Chicago. And we found the right guy, and he did it for us. So find out who that person is and go there. You know, it doesn't have to be the person that represents your own immediate area. And I'm happy to help or hear from anyone if they are interested in trying to pursue this in your home state. Of course, getting it on the RUSP is extremely important because there's quite a few states that have legislation that says that if a disorder is added to the RUSP, we have to add it within some finite period of time. So absolutely critical to get it on the RUSP. I'm really hopeful that it will get on there. It will get there. If not this time, then eventually, but hopefully this time. But states can screen. You heard it's a state prerogative. They can screen for disorders that are not on the RUSP. So it doesn't have to be on the RUSP for your state to screen. You know, and the bottom line of all of this is the future is very bright. You know, we have Krabbe on the RUSP now. We have XALD. Now there's hope for children born with MLD and other leukodystrophies. Newborn screening and early treatment saves lives. It completely alters the impact of these devastating disorders. I see a future where doctors like myself won't know what MLD looks like because we'll find all of these babies at birth. They will get treatment and their lives will be entirely different. It'll be like polio. You know, I've never seen a patient with symptomatic polio. I don't know what it looks like. I want that, you know, for all of the conditions that we deal with. And I think it can happen for MLD. So thank you for your attention. And I'm going to call Mike up to the podium. He'll tell you a little bit about how the test works. And of course, we're so grateful to him for developing the tests that make all of these things possible.
Thanks.
You want to use this?
Yeah, are my slides here? Or...
Can somebody help him get his slides?
Yeah. My computer. Where's my there we go. Yeah, okay. Okay. Pleasure to be here. think I said this last night. I love what I do because of you guys. I need you and you need me. Okay, maybe leave it at that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about MLD, newborn screening, how the test works, and the punchline is that it works perfectly. We learned a lot from newborn screening of Krabbe disease, as Dieter summarized. When we started newborn screening for Krabbe disease, we measured the enzyme. And when the enzyme was low, most of the time you have Krabbe disease, but sometimes you have false positives. So you need a second test. And DNA really didn't do a good job. So then came cyclosine. I think the enzyme is like a one-legged chicken, and cyclosine's the other leg. And now you have a proper chicken. You need both. So now comes the question, do you do enzyme activity first or do you do cyclosine first? Doesn't really matter, but it's an easy choice here because the enzyme assay is much easier to do first. So we do this on the 300,000 babies in New York, and then 50 a year come back with low enzyme. We do cyclosine, which is harder to do. So after 20 years of this, we learned a lot about how to screen for LSDs, and we now know that we need a first and a second tier test. Okay. And as you'll see, it works perfectly. We really know how to screen for LSDs now. MPS 1, MPS 2, pretty much all of them. If we do two-tier test. Let's see, on the first slide. So MLD is like Krabbe, except it's backwards. We do the equivalent of cyclosine first, the sulfatide. And then we do the enzyme. Krabbe, we do the enzyme, then the cyclosine. And the reason is very simple. It's the same. It's easier to do the sulfatide than the enzyme. So we do it first. It's that simple. It's very simple. So on this slide, we did this pilot study where, we took newborn blood spots from kids that were diagnosed with MLD, and we showed if the enzyme that breaks down the sulfatide is deficient, the sulfatide goes up. Just like cyclosine goes up when GAL-C is deficient. When ARSA is deficient, the sulfatides go up. So you can see the high sulfatides, but then in the random newborns, you can see there's some overlap. Now, why do we have overlap? Why do normal babies have elevated sulfatide? We don't know. But if you look in the urine, there's no overlap. The sulfatides are much higher in MLD patients in the urine than it is in the blood, but we don't get urine during newborn screening. We only get blood. The reason it's high in the urine is because the sulfatide in the blood is kind of a waste product, and everything in the blood that's a waste product ends up in the urine. So most of the sulfatides that are elevated in the blood end up in the urine, and they go way up. In blood, they go up, but not as much. But in newborn screening, we're forced to use blood. So there's overlap between the two. It's that simple. But then we do the second tier test. We do the ARSA. We measure the ARSA in the same blood spot before we call the families, because most of the time it's a false positive. The sulfatides are elevated, but it's not MLD. And we'd rather do this before we call the families for obvious reasons. Just like we should do cyclosine before we call families. So if we do this, we measure, and the ARSA is done second because it's harder to do, but still easy enough for a newborn screening. If we do this, out of 29,000 babies that we tested, we have no false positives. Let me say it again. We have no false positives. But Mike, there's always false positives when you have newborn screening. We saw none. Let me say it again. We saw none. Okay. Now, what about false negatives? False negatives. Let's think about it. How would you know if you missed one? And there's only one way to tell. That is, you can take a bunch of newborn blood spots from kids that have MLD that went on to clinically be confirmed to have MLD. You can take their newborn blood spots from the state that stores them and show that the test catches all of them. It's that simple. Okay, so I'll be finished in a minute. the bottom line is we did this on 40 blood spots from MLD kids, and we catch all of them. So we catch 40 out of 40. So you would have to be a real cynic to think that we're going to miss a lot of MLD patients. It's that simple. We catch 40 out of 40. Okay. So I think, let me just end again, and say it again. When you go to your legislature, tell them, and in Germany, then we did 300,000. 4 cases of MLD were found. 3 of them qualified for treatment and were treated. We had no false positives and no false negatives. So when you go to your legislature, please tell them that you have a perfect newborn screen method for MLD without any false positives as far as we know, and no false negatives as far as we know. And they won't believe you. Then send them to me and I'll talk to them. Okay, thank you.